For 200 years, archaeology has run on a single impulse. When you find a tomb, you open it. We unwrapped the pharaohs, we emptied the pyramids, we pried the lid off almost every great burial that human beings have ever made, all in the name of knowing what was inside. There is one we have never touched, the largest, richest, most ambitious tomb on Earth. The grave of the man who invented China. We know exactly where it is. We have known for 50 years. We have the machines that could open it. And the people who guard it have decided, on purpose, that no one ever will. The question is why. And the answer is not the one almost everybody reaches for. Not the poison, not the traps, not a government burying some secret. The real reason is stranger than any of that. And it begins with a completely different tomb on the other side of the country that somebody did open. This is the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, just outside the city of Xi'an in central China. And nearly everything famous about it is only the outer wall around the real secret. In the spring of 1974, farmers digging a well in a dry field struck fragments of hard clay. What they had hit was the edge of one of the greatest discoveries ever made, the Terracotta Army, thousands of life-sized soldiers, every one of them with a different face, drawn up in battle formation underground. Somewhere around 8,000 figures, with horses and chariots and real weapons, an entire army modeled in clay and buried in the earth. The whole world knows them from photographs. What the world tends to forget is that they were never the point. They are guards. They stand facing east, more than a kilometer away from the thing they were built to protect. Because at the center of this complex is a hill. From the outside, it looks like a natural rise in the land. Green, rounded, still more than 70 meters tall, even after 2,000 years of wind and rain have worn it down. It is not a hill, it is a man-made mound, raised over the burial chamber of the first emperor of China. When it was built, it stood perhaps 115 meters high, a small mountain of rammed earth. And the walled necropolis around it covers an area larger than 50 square kilometers, making this the biggest tomb complex ever constructed by anyone, anywhere. It took something like 38 years to build, most of the emperor's adult life. And in half a century of excavating everything around it, no archaeologist has ever set foot inside. The man under that mound earned it. In 221 BC, Qin Shi Huang ended centuries of warfare by conquering every rival state and welding them into a single country. The first time China had ever been one empire. He standardized its writing, its money, the width of its roads. He linked the first version of the Great Wall. He ruled with absolute, often brutal control. By some accounts, ordering the burning of books and the burying of scholars who defied him. And the country's very name, China, traces back through the centuries to his dynasty, the Qin. He was one of the most powerful human beings who has ever lived. So when the records say he spent 38 years and the labor of a nation preparing for his own death, that is entirely in character. And according to the one detailed account we have, what he built beneath that mound was not really a grave at all. It was a world. That account comes from a historian named Sima Qian, writing about 100 years after the emperor died. What he describes sounds less like a tomb than like a machine. Beneath the mound, he wrote, 700,000 laborers dug down through 3 layers of groundwater and lined the chamber with bronze. Inside, they built a scale model of the emperor's entire empire. Its palaces, its towers, and across the ceiling, the heavens themselves, the sun and moon and stars. And running through that miniature world were its rivers and its seas, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, the Great Ocean, recreated not in water, but in liquid mercury, set to flow and circulate by some mechanical means. Overhead, he wrote, the ceiling was studded to map the night sky, and the chamber was lit by lamps fueled with the fat of the manfish, most likely whale oil, engineered to burn without going out for a very long time, so the buried emperor would never lie in the dark. To stop intruders, crossbows were rigged to fire, on their own, at anyone who broke in. And when the work was done, the craftsmen who knew its secrets were sealed inside it alive, so that the secrets would die with them. For most of 2,000 years, scholars read that the way you probably just did, as a tall tale, a historian a century late, piling on marvels. Rivers of Mercury sounded like pure myth. Then they tested the soil, and here the story turns in the direction you'd least expect, not toward debunking the legend, but toward proving it. Survey after survey of the mound has found mercury in the ground at levels far higher than anything natural for that region. And it isn't spread evenly. The heaviest concentrations fall in a pattern, strongest toward the north and the east, exactly where the sea and the great rivers would lie on a map of China. More recently, instruments have picked up mercury vapor rising straight out of the earth, leaking up through cracks that have opened over the centuries. The rivers of mercury appear to be real. Not every detail survives the test. There is no evidence the crossbows still work or ever fired at all. Most archaeologists think they were a deterrent, a story told to frighten off grave robbers more than a working weapon. But the single most fantastical image in the whole account, a dead emperor lying in a landscape of flowing quicksilver, is the part the science keeps confirming, so we know roughly what is down there. Decades of radar and scanning with the cosmic particles that rain down through solid rock have mapped a large chamber roughly 30 meters down beneath the mound, a space with high walls apparently still standing, not collapsed, not flooded, not looted, sitting inside its own shell of poison. One of the archaeologists who led the work for more than a decade put the dilemma plainly. We can see what is there, but we cannot preserve it if we disturb it. The structures they have detected line up with the kind of palace Sima Qian described. By every standard of archaeology, this is the prize of prizes, the intact heart of the largest tomb ever built, sitting a few dozen meters under a hill that millions of tourists drive past every year. Every instinct of the last 2 centuries screams, "Open it." They won't. And the first thing most people assume is that China must be hiding something. A political secret, an awkward truth, a cover-up. That assumption is wrong. And the real answer is more uncomfortable than any conspiracy. They won't open it because they are not certain they can do it without destroying what's inside. And they have proof. When the Terracotta Army first came out of the ground in the 1970s, the soldiers were not the dull gray you see in the museum today. They were painted, bright pinks and reds and greens, a coat of vivid lacquer over every figure. But the instant that lacquer met the dry desert air, after 2,000 years sealed in damp earth, it began to curl and crack and flake away. Within minutes of being uncovered, some of the color was simply gone. The most famous archaeological objects on the planet reached the daylight, and the daylight started erasing them. That was the warning. To understand why it genuinely frightens Chinese archaeologists, you have to leave Qin Shi Huang's tomb completely, travel to the far side of the country, and go back to a decision made in 1956. The last time anyone in China opened a sealed imperial tomb. Outside Beijing lie the tombs of the Ming emperors. In 1956, a group of leading scholars won permission to excavate one of them, Dingling, the resting place of the Wanli emperor, dead since 1620. They broke through into the underground palace and found it whole. Thousands of objects, robes of silk, rolls of brocade, lacquered wood, and the coffins of the emperor and his 2 empresses. And then they watched it die. They had neither the technology nor the materials to preserve what they'd uncovered. The silks, hit by open air after 300 years, darkened and went to pieces. Treasures fell apart faster than anyone could even record them. Precious brocade was reportedly mounted the wrong way, left to rot, and thrown into a storeroom that leaked. Then the politics of the time turned on the tomb itself. The scholar who had pushed hardest to open it was branded an enemy of the state and died in prison. During the Cultural Revolution, the original coffins were thrown down a ravine, and a mob dragged the bones of the Wanli emperor and his 2 empresses into a courtyard, denounced them, and burned them in front of a crowd. An intact imperial tomb had been opened, and within a single generation, almost everything that had made it priceless was gone. China learned that lesson and wrote it into law. Since Dingling, the government has refused to open a single sealed imperial tomb. Not for treasure, not for tourism, not even when an entrance turned up by accident. The rule is blunt: you do not open these unless something is already destroying them, because opening them is itself how they are lost. So the tomb of the first emperor stays shut, not from fear of the mercury or the crossbows or any curse. From the hard knowledge that our tools are still not good enough, that to break that seal today would be to trade an intact 2,000-year-old world for a few months of headlines and a heap of ruin. And there is one final turn here, the one the emperor himself might appreciate most. Qin Shi Huang spent the end of his life desperate to escape death. He sent whole fleets east across the sea, carrying hundreds of young men and women to search for islands of immortals and bring back the elixir of eternal life. They never returned. He swallowed potions meant to grant it, many of them containing mercury and other heavy metals, which slowly poisoned him. The hunt for eternal life is, very probably, exactly what killed him. He never got the immortality he chased, but his tomb did, sealed, drowned in the same poison that killed its owner, and now guarded by a law that forbids anyone to enter. His buried empire has survived perfectly, untouched, for 22 centuries, precisely because no one can safely reach it. The emperor failed to live forever. His tomb is doing it for him. That is the part I cannot get past. We tend to think of a sealed tomb as something simply waiting to be opened, a question with an answer we'll get to eventually, once the technology catches up. But to stand on that grassy mound is to stand on a decision to wait that may well outlast every person now alive. Maybe in 100 years we'll have tools fine enough to go in and break nothing. Maybe we never will. And maybe the most honest thing a civilization can do with its single greatest treasure is to admit out loud that it isn't ready, and leave it in the dark. The first emperor built a machine to make himself eternal. It did not work the way he intended. It worked better. He is still down there in his country of Mercury, beneath his painted stars, exactly as he was left. And the entire reach of the modern world has agreed, for now, not to touch him. There's another set of coordinates already waiting. Come with me, somewhere new every few days, some doors you leave closed.